Please turn to page 87 of the instruction booklet.
Welcome to our fourth episode. I am your host, not clad in pink. That's Jeremy, and I'm joined by the man who definitely supports the Barbieheimer universe. As always, joined by my co-host, Michael. Michael, how's it going?
Yeah, I know. There's actually some debates as to whether or not it should be Barbenheimer or Oppenbarbie.
I mean, just depends.
Yeah, I haven't seen either one yet. I'm still waiting. I actually promised a group of friends that I'd wait and to go see it with them, but I definitely will be wearing pink when I go to see Barbie. So
I wore black when I went and saw Barbie, but my girlfriend wore a pair of Barbie shoes that she found from Walmart. And
nice. And
like she was like, her and my best friend were both like dressed to the nines. It's like Barbie stuff, so it was pretty epic. It's a good movie though. I really enjoyed it.
I've heard. Yep.
So, but yeah, welcome to the fourth episode of the instruction booklet. You know that we like, you know, as we said in our previous episode, we didn't really know what we wanted to talk about this week, and we literally just decided what we wanted to talk about just a few minutes ago. So,
yeah.
We're just going to talk about Barbie games. Just all of the Barbie games ever made.
The long backlog of Barbie-related video games.
Yeah, no. We've got a pretty interesting topic for us tonight / today, whenever you're listening to this. But I guess first, Michael, what you been up to lately? What you been playing, reading, watching, doing?
Well, a bunch of things. I have started playing Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl.
It's a fantastic game.
In part. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. And actually, the reason I'm playing it finally is due in part to the fact that I just read Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, which is the book that the book and the movie Stalker is actually kind of loosely based on. I'm planning on teaching that book in my my course that I'm teaching in the fall. So I finally figured it was time to play Stalker.
Yeah.
And then I've been reading Aristotle's Poetics, and I just finished watching season 3 of The Righteous Gemstones with my family. So that's been fun.
I need to watch that. I've been recommended it before.
It's really funny. I mean, especially if you're somebody, you know, if you're an American with I guess like a Christian upbringing, it's just kind of funny because it does a lot to reflect on some of the more interesting cultural aspects in a very satirical and funny way.
Yeah.
I won't say anything else, but, you know, highly recommend. I think it's very good.
Okay. Sweet. Mostly for me, like I said, I went and saw Barbie a few weeks ago, and I've been playing mostly Cyberpunk. I'm about halfway through the game now, and then I realized I never finished the final ending for Blasphemous when Blasphemous 2 came out, so I sat down for a day and knocked out my fourth playthrough of Blasphemous.
Nice. And
I've been watching. I finished The Bear season 2, which was fantastic.
Oh, same.
And I'm happy that Futurama's back and What We Do in the Shadows is back. Been watching both of those, and I've been reading. Mostly for me, I've just been catching up on my comics because I got way behind on my comics.
Sure.
And I've been reading a bunch of manga and stuff like that. So I was before we even sat down to start recording, I knocked out the last 2 chapters of Dan to Dan because I was super behind on it.
Nice.
But yeah,
Your comment about the final ending of Blasphemous also reminded me that I just finished finally playing Returnal.
Oh yeah,
because it came out on PC earlier this year, and it has kind of an obnoxious, like real ending thing that you have to do that involves just like a lot of backtracking and finding items. It's a very good game. I highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of the kind of frantic, running, gunning, arena style action like Doom Eternal. It's very good.
Yeah, I recommend anybody to play Blasphemous because that game kind of came out of nowhere for me, and then it took me a while to play it, and then when I did, I was like, oh my god, this is really good. Like, it really gave me that like Dark Souls 1 feel, but in like a 2D side scroller sense.
Yeah,
and it's got a sequel, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so all right, well, enough about some of the stuff. It's time to get into the actual meat of what we're going to talk about today. But
yes, sure.
We're going to talk about something that just kind of came up recently, which it kind of spawned from Michael sent me a screenshot article from the study about gaming preservation, and the two of us got to talking, we realized that like this seems like a pretty important subject. So tonight, and today, whenever you listen to this, we're going to talk about like some games that we remember that may not be highlighted, and we're going to kind of use that as a way to talk about gaming preservation as a whole, which is going to be kind of more like the meat of the episode. But I think Michael, you're going to start us off with talking about some old games that may be sort of lost or maybe inaccessible due to other reasons.
Games that I think have a kind of an interesting status that concerns me as far as preservation is concerned.
Yeah.
To kind of, I guess, just like give listeners some context as to the article that I sent Jeremy. He'll get into the details a little bit more later. But recently there was kind of a study that found that apparently 87% of games released in the US before 2010 are not commercially available, which IGN reports as being a similar survival rate to silent films, actually. And that's concerning. 87%.
That's a lot.
It raises some questions about, I guess, like how seriously we're taking video games as a medium and as an art form. If we're not really interested in kind of going back and playing old things, and at least just preserving them so that they can be enjoyed the way that they were enjoyed when they first came out. And that latter part is kind of something that I want to talk about with regard to the games that I've chosen to highlight. Because when Jeremy and I were talking the other day, I could not help but think about games with weird peripherals.
Yeah, like a Guitar Hero kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Games that require you to have some weird, third-party extra hardware for controlling the game that is probably only going to be useful for that game itself. Now, of course, people will go on to do, no-hit runs of Elden Ring with Guitar Hero guitars and that kind of stuff. But, as far as these things are designed, they're designed for the games that they kind of ship with.
Yeah, I think the example we both came to was Donkey Konga.
Donkey Konga, yep. I swear I still have the bongos for that somewhere. And, every once in a while you'll hear people, in gaming news playing, I don't know, Smash Brothers tournaments with the Donkey Konga bongos. It's weird. It's funny. But if you were to try and go back and play Donkey Konga now, certainly you might be able to find an emulation of it on the internet. You might be able to find, a ROM that you can download or something that would allow you to play it on your computer. Or maybe you're even lucky enough to find a copy of the disc and you have a GameCube somewhere. But if you don't have the bongos, right, there's something kind of intrinsically lost about the experience of playing the game differently than it was kind of intended to be played. If we care about that thing. It's
like trying to play like a rhythm game where you just push your controller buttons. Like it doesn't have the same like feel to it.
I remember that was always an option with the original Guitar Hero games. Like actually you could play Guitar Hero with a controller, but it's like you're losing something almost like, I think, kind of just like the point of the experience, which is that it's meant to feel like you're playing a guitar, at least for, a kid.
Yeah.
And I think Guitar Hero and Rock Band, they were at least big enough that I'm sure there's probably still a bunch of controllers sitting in a warehouse somewhere, right? I have no doubt that you could probably find a Guitar Hero controller if you wanted to, at least, for a mainline Guitar Hero entry. But there are some weirder examples. My brother and I, for a while, were really interested in Guitar Hero, and we had a DS, Nintendo DS, and so I distinctly remember actually having a Guitar Hero game that was for the DS, and it was this wacky thing that required you to plug a fake fretboard kind of deal into the Game Boy Advanced slot in the DS, if I recall. And then you would have a guitar pick shaped stylus that would allow you to kind of strum on the touch screen as if you were trying to play with the Guitar Hero guitar on a television. And looking back, it's just kind of a wacky thing. Mm-hmm. And I feel like certainly I must have. I mean, that's not the kind of thing that I would sell. I don't even know. GameStop would probably pay you like $4 for it.
I'm sure. Or like there's got to be some like collector out there that just really has to have it.
Right. Well, at this point, yes. Back in the day when it came out, probably not.
Yeah.
But that, it makes me think like, man, I really should find that. But also kind of same problem, if anyone, for whatever reason, were interested in going back and playing Guitar Hero World Tour, I think this one was called. Let me just double check that real quick.
Was that this will be for the portable one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Guitar Hero World Tour. Oh no, it came out on... I must be thinking of a different name then, because this one was for the Wii. Yeah. Regardless, it's a thing that, like, for whatever reason, if you wanted to play it, you probably can't anymore. At least not in the originally intended way. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I was thinking about the WarioWare games. All of them kind of had their own weird gimmicks in terms of how they would be played. My brother and I remember were huge fans of both WarioWare Touched for the DS and then WarioWare Twisted for the Game Boy Advanced. And yeah, it's crazy. I mean, if you go online, I just, for fun, I went on Amazon and I went on eBay the other day and I just started looking at prices. There are brand new copies of WarioWare Twisted available in, upwards of couple of hundreds of dollars. I think I saw one for $300.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. Basically, the game cartridge itself, it was very large because it had a built-in kind of like a gyroscope, I guess. I'm not sure exactly what the hardware was, but it would detect if you rotated the system. Mm-hmm. So like a steering wheel, you would be sitting there with the Game Boy Advanced in your hands, kind of turning it left and right to do whatever wacky mini game it was that, like the WarioWare games, they're full of just these nonsense mini games that pop up that you just have to do.
Right.
And it was very cool. And so you couldn't do that these days, right? I mean, that's to say, if you wanted to play WarioWare Twisted the way that I experienced it when I was a kid, if I ever wanted to, out of a blast of nostalgia, wanted to go back and play WarioWare Twisted, I would either have to shell out a ton of money, first of all, to get a new Game Boy Advanced. I have no idea where my Game Boy Advanced is. And then probably pay another couple $100 to get a working version of this game, because certainly they're not making it anymore.
Yeah.
That's the only way I would be able to play this game.
Yeah, and that's like just the thought that they're like, that is your options, is it's either find, and even if you found like an emulator, it wouldn't work the same. Like
right.
So like, and that's like a lot of this, like the case of all this just becomes the accessibility and the intention kind of like, can you play these things the way that they were?
Yeah. I mean, maybe I could hook up some kind of weird motion control to my computer. I mean, it would take a lot of effort, I feel like, for me to recreate anything that looks even slightly like the original WarioWare touched experience or WarioWare Twisted experience on my PC through the use of an emulator.
Right.
Same with WarioWare Touched. I mean, I don't have a touch screen attached to my PC. Maybe I could drag the mouse cursor up and down on the screen to do the things that were required in game, but it's, again, just a fundamentally different experience.
Right.
And especially with like the original Game Boy Advanced, certainly AA batteries are still available. But, if you were interested in playing on an SP, or even like a Nintendo DS, which could be backwards compatible with certain Game Boy Advance games, you would have to have a charger for it as well. Like even if I could find my Game Boy Advanced SP, I don't know that I have a charger for it, and that thing is not taking USB-C. So like, I don't even know that I'm going to be able to turn the thing on.
How dare they not have USB compatibility back then?
I know, crazy. Where Nintendo should have been thinking ahead.
Yeah, they should have been thinking so far ahead.
And beyond WarioWare Touched and Twisted, I want to bring some attention to perhaps what is the most absurd example of a game with a kind of a wacky peripheral. Maybe it's just a unique quirk of the hardware. But there's a game by Mr. Hideo Kojima himself. He talks about it on his podcast, which is definitely great, and you guys should go check out as well. Boktai, The Sun is in Your Hand, is what the name of the original game is. This was a game for the Game Boy Advance, came out in 2003 in Japan, and was later localized to the US in September of 2003, so later that year. Basically, this was a vampire hunting game for the original Game Boy Advanced, where you kind of had to play during the day and in direct sunlight, because the game cartridge actually had a photometric light sensor, which would sense light exposure and would kind of like charge the game, which in game would give you sunlight missiles that you could use to blast the vampires in game.
That's so random.
So it's so weird. I mean, I just imagine, like being a little kid trying to play this game and being disappointed because it's nighttime, like,
right.
Oh man, I can't play Boktai, The Sun is Near. I just bought it, like, imagine there's a midnight release for this game.
Oh my god, so many people would be disappointed.
Be able to play it.
You see like people like plugging their cartridge in as they're walking out of the GameStop, like, what? I can't beat this boss.
Yeah. This game is too hard. Yeah. Who knows if they would have done that kind of thing back in the day, but that is a funny thought.
Yeah.
Somehow, Boktai ended up getting 2 sequels that continued to use this technology. It wasn't until later in the series that, I think the 4th Boktai game.
Like Lunar Touch or whatever.
Yeah, Lunar Nights or something. It rebranded so as to kind of move the game series away from, I guess, this wacky reliance on the need to be playing outside and in the sun. And I guess it's another one of those things, where previously you were mentioning with regard to emulation. If I emulate Boktai, The Sun is in Your Hand on my computer, certainly I can maybe get a sense of what playing the game was like back in the day. But something is going to be different about the experience. I'm not going to be standing outside in my backyard, sun blazing in my face, getting 3rd-degree burns, trying to get, enough charge so I can shoot the vampires with my PC. Yeah. I'm going to be playing an emulator that just has, I don't know, some lines of code written to figure out how exactly the charge system is going to work.
I mean, clearly Kojima wanted kids to go out and touch grass.
Yeah. Who knows what his justification for that was? It's bizarre.
Yeah. He's like, man, kids are staying inside too much. I need to make a game where they have to play during the day.
Yeah. And it has me concerned because I think, Nintendo, especially as a company, was interested in kind of exploring these bizarre controllers. You look at Sony and you look at Microsoft, And for the large part, their controllers have been mostly the same since around the Xbox, PlayStation 1 era. And, aside from some missteps, right? We all remember the Kinect, probably.
Yeah.
PlayStation VR is actually still kind of doing quite well with their motion controls, I think. So that works at least. But Nintendo has always been interested in trying to reinvent the wheel. I mean, ever since the Wii, I feel like, at least.
Well, that makes me think about
doing some wacky stuff.
Makes me think about what I was talking about yesterday, where it was like you can't play Duck Hunt on modern televisions.
Yeah, why was that again?
Because how light guns work, they have to have the reflection off the CRT to actually like function correctly. So like any of like the light gun games for like the NES era, and I don't know for sure. I'd have to like look up, but like the Super Scope for the SNES, I think also used the light gun peripheral, but it has to have that like reflective screen to like bounce the information back.
Yeah.
To let you know like where on the screen to register the hit. So like
interesting.
Nintendo always just doing like bizarre things.
Yeah. Emulating Duck Hunt would probably be the most disappointing experience because it would just be as easy as clicking on the ducks on the screen if you're playing with a mouse and keyboard.
Yeah. High score. Speed run Duck Hunt. Let's go.
Yeah. I used to have, that was actually one of the first games I ever owned. And I remember I used to just walk up to the TV and put the zapper right on the screen. Oh, yeah. I thought it was so cool because I was beating everything.
I'm sure you eventually filled the Duck Hunt dog full of lead too, like most everybody else did.
Of course. It's a rite of passage.
Yeah.
But, I think this also just raises some concerns about other controllers. Like VR is becoming an increasingly big thing.
Yeah.
And while I personally don't feel that there's enough incentive for me to want to spend a couple of $100s on a VR headset just yet, I mean, I think there are some compelling reasons why I might Half-Life Alyx, I think, first and foremost among them. I worry about how these things are going to be archived, especially if it requires extra hardware.
Yeah.
And beyond that, even if it is possible to archive it, even if it is possible for people and enthusiasts to have descriptions of games and have playable ROMs of the games on the internet, I worry that something is just going to be lost about a lot of these games that do require weird peripherals. And it kind of makes me sad to think that, WarioWare Twisted might be lost to
lost to time.
Lost to time, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But who knows?
Yeah. Well, see, for me, I'm gonna go a different direction. You talked about all these weird peripherals. I'm gonna talk about a weird PC game that I played when I was younger. I'm gonna talk about a game called Nox, and it was one of the earliest games I remember playing on my PC outside of my copy of Chex Quest that I got out of my cereal box, which was just...
I was going to ask if it was related to the cereal.
Yep, I got it out of a lot of people, like, it's crazy, like, doing research about Chex Quest, because it was a Doom clone. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. But Nox was a game published by Westwood Studios and EA in 2000. And it was an action RPG hybrid. And it was kind of interesting. It used the kind of like the Diablo 1, Diablo 2, like third person perspective, but it had this really crazy mechanic of having a fog of war system where like you couldn't see down hallways if you like your character didn't have line of sight, they couldn't see. Yeah, and it like dynamically just blacks out portions of the screen. So, and it had this like nice, like long single player campaign, and it had 3 different classes. It had a wizard, a warrior, and a conjurer. And each one played like uniquely different, and each one started in a different locations. And like they would have like different intros, and eventually all the characters would like, there was always like a junction point where the story kind of lines up. One of the very first things I remember about this game though was it had an FMV sequence at the very beginning with this like the main bad guy or whatever. It was like this necromancer. reciting some kind of spell, and she's got like candles around her, and the candles go out, and in the middle of her spell she just goes, damn, second-rate candle makers, kill them all when I rule the world. And
nice.
And the main character has the MacGuffin on top of his television, and it pulls him into the portal into this world that is the game. So it was kind of, it had a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor in it. But what was really neat about the game on Well is it had its own PvP mode that was like an FPS game, which had like deathmatch, capture the flag, king of the hill, and it like the developers wanted it to play like an FPS because like Quake and Unreal were popular at the time. This game also featured a free expansion, and by free I mean it took me like a day to download it on 56k internet because it was like 2 gigabytes.
Oh yeah.
So
2 whole gigabytes.
2 whole gigabytes. Yeah, showing my age there. It was called Nox Quest, and it was a co-op multiplayer mode that was kind of like a really neat twist on like what we would consider now like a horde mode or something, but it was done in like almost like a Diablo kind of look. But you would have these little like portal generator things that would just churn out monsters, and it had like an infinite number of levels, and it was a lot of fun. Like, you know, and Nox had this really interesting like following. There was like ladder and clans for the PvP mode. But eventually the company that produced it, Westwood Studios, they went bankrupt, and EA gained full control of it. And when EA got full control over it, they just killed the servers. Like completely just stopped the game's like online community.
Unfortunate.
The great part being like, you know, online communities doing what online communities do is, you know, they've done their best to keep it alive through the years. Surprisingly, nice. You can purchase Nox on GOG. Unfortunately, you cannot play it on modern systems without patching it or running your computer in a compatibility mode. And that just kind of like makes me think about like for a game that I had like a long like beloved like memory of like playing, sitting on my computer for hours. It sucks that like you have to jump through all these hoops to make it work. And I actually own Nox on like GOG because I wanted it. Like I replayed it and everything, but I had to like download like 3 or 4 different like community patches. This wasn't even like patches that was delivered through GOG. Like they didn't provide you any of that. Like if you spend $5 and buy this game, congratulations, you've bought a brick.
Mm-hmm.
And like
it's not even like, you know, there's some games these days where without an unofficial patch people say it's quote unquote unplayable, you know, like Vampire the Masquerade or Deus Ex, but they're really not unplayable. What people mean is just like they're really bad. What you mean is that this game is actually unplayable. Yeah,
like you cannot play this game if you buy it on GOG. And if the people from GOG are somehow listening to our show, I'm sorry if I'm shitting on you. Also, if you want to sponsor us, you know, we'll happily take a few free games.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, but you know, and this game came out before Diablo 2, so like, you know, Diablo 2, like the ARPG of like the early 2000s that like tons of people played, even myself. This game Nox came out before it, predates that game. And it came out like months before it, so it had time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, you know, the studio that developed it goes belly up. The company that was providing most of the money takes it over and then just kills it. And then it just kind of sits there, and people kind of forget about it. And then, like, you can buy it, but it doesn't really work unless you go to like some forum website for a bunch of people who really like this game. And like imagine like if that community didn't exist around the game. You know, it's just a brick of a game that you can buy.
It would have just disappeared.
Yeah. And, you know, and it's stuff like that like, you know, that's part of what made me get to thinking about this. And then this article comes out. So I guess like, you know, this kind of leads us into like, you know, the main thing that we were trying to talk about is like this whole preservation idea. And I have some interesting like excerpts from the study. Like it was like a 51 page like research where someone like went in and took like a large sample size, and determined like, what was working, what wasn't working, and what we mean by like, I guess, preservation, if we wanted to like create like a good definition, would be like, being able to access these games readily for purposes of even research, just for enjoyment, anything.
Yeah.
There's even a section in the report, like for even like you, Michael, where it talks about like the effects of preservation on research.
Yeah.
So
it's concerning, and it's something that I've kind of bumped up against in my own work, because I'm in the middle of working on my prospectus right now as I start working on my dissertation, and I wanted to write a little bit about Colossal Cave Adventure. Mm-hmm. And there's a web browser version of the game that's available online, and I started writing some stuff that, like, without even thinking about it, I was just like, I was writing about the version of the game that I was playing, but then I actually had the thought to go back and check if the things that I was writing about were even present in the original game. Mm-hmm. I think it's the Mac version of the game. We'll get more into this eventually, because I think we're going to talk about this game later on. But in the Mac version of the game, there is a line at the bottom that asks what's next. Mm-hmm. It's like it's meant to be the area, that the prompt for where you would type in the command to do whatever it is that you were going to do in the game. And looking back at gameplay and at footage, I say footage, it's a text-based game, yes, of the original, there doesn't seem to be that same command line. And so I was like, oh, wow, like maybe I shouldn't be writing about this, because actually this wasn't in the original, 77 version of the game. And it's certainly not in the 2023 remake that just came out earlier this year, which I've been meaning to check out. It's a full 3D first-person remake of Colossal. I think it's just called Colossal Cave. It's on Steam.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for research purposes, it makes it exceptionally difficult to be a scholar of the early video game industry, which I'm not claiming to be, but for research purposes, it's important to know, I guess, where the chain of influences go. Mm-hmm. And when these things just aren't preserved properly or in their original form, it's kind of hard to get the facts straight.
Well, and it's some of the stuff that we've run into, even like we've even mentioned it in the previous just episodes where we've talked about history, where it's like there's stuff that we may have missed because it's not been preserved correctly. There are games that are just gone. I guess like talking a little bit more about the study, like they define like 3 systems as like areas of interest, and they define them as like abandoned, neglected, or active. So like an abandoned ecosystem here that they have listed is like with low commercial interest and very few games that get available would be like the Commodore 64, which that's something for us in our next few episodes is going to be something that's kind of important. And then a neglected one, which even to me, like even when I read this report, still kind of blew my mind, was like the Game Boy. Like the Commodore 64 has like, there's only like 4.5% of its overall library is still like available. And then you've got like the Game Boy, which had like just, I can't remember the actual, I'm trying to remember the number here. I had it written down. The Game Boy had just like another, like, yeah. So like maybe like 5% of their overall ecosystem was available for the Game Boy, with like the color and the Advance. It all came out to like 12% of the overall Game Boy library, including like Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance is available. Like, and it suffered like heavily earlier this year when the Wii U and the 3DS eShop went down.
Yeah.
And then like a current active ecosystem that they have that's surprisingly like low was like the PlayStation. PlayStation 2 with only like 20% available. So it's like, it's not just like, you know, if you're thinking like, oh yeah, well, I can't get Atari 2600, or, you know, I can't find like a Coleco. Like, no, though, it's like there are things that are still like you would consider like newer that's just already starting to fade away, like a Game Boy or the PlayStation 2, which is just wild to think about.
Yeah. It doesn't seem as real, I think, for some people when it's consoles that predate you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you tell me that, I don't know, only 2% of games are available for, you know, the Atari VCS or the Commodore.
Yeah, right? You're like, whatever.
It's like, oh, that makes sense, right? Who even played that console?
Yeah.
But when you tell me, like, you know, that there's tons of games missing for, I don't know, the GameCube or the PlayStation 2, all of a sudden it's like, what? Like, I feel like I just played that last week. You know, you're telling me I can't just go to GameStop and get a copy of, I don't know, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle? Like, that's wild.
Yeah, it's like just terrible.
Yeah.
And like, you know, in this, like, they had it and they did like they had like a breakdown. They took like out of a random sample of like 400 games released for the Commodore 64. You know, they find maybe 4% of them, and then like, you know, and the Nintendo was like, the Game Boy was doing okay. And then this shutdown happened earlier this year, and this is kind of what in the article, like it mentions, like this was kind of like the catalyst for starting this survey. Was like in March of this year, they saw the 3DS and the Wii U eShop shut down, and it took almost like 1,000 games out of out of availability.
Yeah,
just like that in the blink of an eye.
Yeah,
just like gone. So
it's concerning, I think, with it seems almost absurd to suggest this, right? But digital libraries in general, Steam, the Epic Games Store, GOG, you know, whatever platform it is, especially as some companies are very insistent on having their own. You know, it's like if you want to play a Blizzard game, you specifically have to have the Blizzard launcher.
Mm-hmm.
It raises concerns to me about what it means to actually like own these games. You know, if you're lucky enough to have bought this thing and downloaded it, it's like, cool, you have it as long as your hard drive lasts. But when that digital accessibility goes away, it's like you're now actually kind of in a position of your ownership of this game is precarious.
Yeah.
Right. If for whatever reason, you know, Valve goes under and Steam shuts down, it's like, what happens to all? How many games do I have on Steam?
Oh,
what happens to all like, you know, 250 of the games that I have on Steam, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, what is it? I think I heard the other day that Alan Wake 2 is not having a physical release. I think they will be selling boxes, but I'm pretty sure the boxes are only going to have digital download codes.
That's crazy.
And that's crazy because it's like, you know, what happens if, I don't know, like what happens if I don't have internet access? Or what happens if the files become no longer available at some point in the future? Obviously, this isn't going to happen tomorrow, but, you know, 20 years from now, let's say, if 20 years from now I go back and I decide I want to play Alan Wake 2, what is the state of the industry going to look like? Is it still going to be possible for me to do that? Or am I going to have to wait for, you know, Alan Wake 2 16K remake for the PS7?
16K.
You know, I'm sure we'll be, who knows, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. You get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. It's just like, yeah, and that, I guess that kind of bleeds into the point of like, apparently, like, and in this like research, like this document, like they talk about like some people are being very forward about it. Like Sony even has like an entire like division developed to making sure that they can preserve some things. So that's good. Like, you know, it's good to know that like there are some people out there that recognize that, hey, you know, we need to make sure that some games need to be preserved to the point of like importance. I think even like there's like a quote from Phil Spencer in this thing, like this guy who works for Microsoft. But then you get into like the other weird things where like now sometimes it's almost like people are removing games for intense purposes. Like I sent you this quote today, like the one for Sega, where it's like for what was it at? I'm trying to think. Yeah, I wrote, in a notable example, Sega, the owners of Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, withdrew 10 Sonic titles from digital marketplace in 2010 due to their poor quality in order to, quote, increase the value of the Sonic brand. While some of those titles have been reissued, others have not. Sega has not commented on why they did or did not reissue certain titles, but presumably they would not reissue titles they believe there was no longer interest in. This is their right. As the Entertainment Software Association stated in 2020, copyright owners not only have the right to reissue their games, but also the, quote, right to decide not to do any of those things. However, this is still a loss to the availability of historical titles. So like Sega in 2010 was just like, no one cares about Sonic right now. Let's just scoop up these 10 games. And then later they just re-released them in like a bundle or a package with like,
right,
you know, AAA price on it. So it's like, you know, there's like this weird like corner case marketability thing where if you pull games out of historical usage and then re-release them in a bundle for $30-$40, you know, because you made it unavailable, like there's this like weird point of how much of this is them intentionally like removing it versus, you know, not caring.
Yeah.
So
it's yeah, even if they don't directly pull games from availability, I think there are concerns about, you know, when games naturally get phased out in terms of being obsolete on current hardware. I'm thinking of Metal Gear Solid. Like Metal Gear Solid 3 remake is coming. Very excited. I will pay full price for it. But there's going to be, you know, the bundle, I think, with Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 alongside it, as far as I know.
Yeah, they're re-releasing 1, 2, and 3 on the Switch as well.
Yeah, I have been waiting years to replay those games because I frankly, I mean, like, aside from finding an emulator, which I suppose is possible, I don't have hardware. Like, I don't have a PS3 anymore. I don't have a PS2 anymore. I don't have a PS1 anymore. I just don't have the hardware to actually track down and play these games, like, authentically, I suppose. And, you know, thankfully, Metal Gear is a important enough franchise, it's a marketable enough franchise that Sony will keep it alive because they recognize there's money in it. Mm-hmm. But, you know, there might not be money in a Nox or a Boktai or a WarioWare. And who knows what the status of these games will be. These, you know, classic games as they get older and harder to track down, and maybe it's deemed not commercially valuable to try and revive them.
Yeah. Well, you know, and then in some cases with preservation, there's even like limits of just like technology.
Yeah.
Or, you know, and there's some of them, like when I was reading, it was talking about like licensing agreements, where those can get really complicated and messy. There's an excerpt from the article. It says the popular X-Men arcade game from 1992 was developed by Konami, was not reissued until 2010 due to Konami's licensing agreement with the X-Men right holder, Marvel. And the license agreement, which gave Konami the limited ability to distribute the game in arcades, likely expired soon after the game's original release. Presumably, Konami only acquired a license for the years they expected to manufacture and distribute the game and did not plan to keep it in production for decades. And then, strangely enough, a few years later, the game has been re-released after some time in a limited replica arcade cabinet that's fetching a price tag of $749.99.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, you know, and that's kind of like what you were talking about earlier, where you could go play these games, but you'd have to like buy a PlayStation 2. You might have to track down a copy of this game. How much is that game? It's stupid price, like for older games. Last year I went to this thing called Game Jam South, and there are vendors there selling classic games. And like, I think I was telling you this yesterday with the notes going over, is like, I have a very fond memory of playing the NES version of like DuckTales. They re-released that game a few years ago. I bought the remaster because turns out if you try and buy like an NES copy of DuckTales, it can cost you like $100 just to own that cartridge.
Huh.
And I have an NES. I have like a functioning, like a working NES here at my house. I don't have a copy of DuckTales, and I would like to play it. But I'm not paying $100 for something that costs like $20.
Yeah.
Like, the market is absurd in like secondary areas.
Yeah.
So to think that an X-Men game that was popular in the arcades, that Konami could have like, settled things with Marvel, made some game, put it out on like a digital or like even just a re-release. Instead, they make a limited quantity of it in an arcade cabinet and sell it for like $780.
Yeah.
That was like last year with they finally put MVC2 out. They re-released MVC2 again in only an arcade cabinet version.
That sucks. Why would I just don't understand? Let's like, there's money on the table,
Yeah. So you're making like what, 500 cabinets at like $800 a pop. When if you like released it on a digital storefront for $60, you could probably like hit a wider, you cast a wider net, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not in this position of power to make these decisions.
Yeah. Well, that's why, I appreciate the work being done by actual institutions to like try and archive these things. I wish my university was this cool, but apparently the University of Michigan Library actually has a video game archive.
Nice.
That literally just has a collection of old consoles and video games and board games from the 70s up until the present.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a part of the library you can just go and play these things if they have them, which is cool. And it's glad to see a university kind of taking this project seriously. I know the University of Michigan is actually quite good in terms of their interest in video game studies and archiving video game history. Video Game History Foundation has like a whole website kind of dedicated to game preservation.
Yeah.
And then the Internet Archive actually has a backlog of like ROMs and downloadable, emulatable games. Not downloadable, but games that you can emulate actually on their archive, going back, I think, as early as 77, which is pretty crazy. You can even just go online and just like play them, yourself if you're listening and you want to take a look at what they have. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, it's like we've used this word a few times throughout the night, and I guess we could like expand upon it a little bit, but like we keep bringing up like emulation, and emulation is great. The good part about emulation is it's mostly fan, and it's mostly like people who are passionate about it, and they build these versions. The problem being there are organizations, and companies out there that are like not really happy about emulation.
Yeah.
And that kind of
off Nintendo.
Yeah. I feel like throughout the night, it's like you've been like, oh, this, and I'm just like been like, man, fuck the companies.
Yeah.
But it's true. Like these companies, like, I don't understand, like, the things that they have to lose to be like, allow games to be accessible. And,
yeah,
emulation does such a great job. I had a coworker today, I was telling him about some of the stuff we were looking at, and he brought up a game that I'd completely forgot about, that he was like, I can't believe Square Enix let the game genre die. And that was Parasite Eve.
I recall the name. I don't remember the game, but
yeah, it was like a weird. It was a Square Enix game. It was like this weird, like RPG Resident Evil hybrid kind of game, and it's like, oh right, yeah, and I think you can only play that game through emulation right now. So, or and then it gets to like we were talking to like. You're talking about like Colossal Cave Adventure. I think you brought it up yesterday with the notes where we were talking about like, what about stuff like PT or like games that are just gone?
Yeah.
Where it's like, if this game gets remade and someone didn't find every single little thing, is it still like the authentic game?
That's the thing that like has me not interested in remakes of PT. And I'm not gonna buy a $1,000 PlayStation 4 that somebody downloaded it on and still has it. If somebody remakes PT like painstakingly, maybe they have the original game and they go through and they find everything. I'm sure people have hacked the game files at this point, right? Didn't they find out that the ghost like follows you around constantly? I guess like my concern would just be that there's going to be something that doesn't translate into the new version. Somebody's going to miss something, I feel like.
Yeah.
And just that means that no new secrets will ever be found.
Right.
Because it's just going to be transported into a playable version onto the PC with whatever had just been discovered at the time. And I understand that, a video game is not going to be a bottomless well of secrets, but still, it's a little bit disappointing.
Right. And, I don't want to make it sound like everything's like doom and gloom. Like, luckily there's a lot of places like, you mentioned like the universities, stuff like that. The website that we found all this information is called like gamehistory.org. And they do like a really great job of like doing their best to like preserve things. So,
yeah,
it's one of those like, is it sucky that like, 85% of games before 2010 are playable? Absolutely. Are there steps being taken? Yeah, there seems to be people out there that legitimately care and are like making an effort to like preserve things. So, will we ever get Nox remastered? Probably not.
Probably not. Though, I think it is cool to see. It's cool on some level to see the recent wave of remastering old games. I mean, just in the past few years, we've had Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4, Dead Space, Demon Souls, System Shock just came out. I do want to play that at some point.
I think there's been a ton of them just in the last 2-3 years that are just like remakes. Like they did like Advance Wars 1 and 2. Nintendo just surprise dropped out of nowhere in the middle of like March Metroid Prime.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, and they like updated the controls and everything, like, and it was just like, thanks Nintendo for that. Like, I think it was either last year before last, Nintendo did the Super Mario All-Star Collection, where it had like Super Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy, and it was like a limited time run. I bought it because I love Galaxy, and
yeah.
It was just kind of neat to own, like sometimes, like some of these developers have done some kind of odd and shade, but like, it seems like we're in this point where people are more interested in remastering old things that either may have been missed or beloved. Like just a few weeks ago, Nintendo announced that they're redoing Super Mario RPG.
Yeah,
and
I did see that.
I'm excited about that because it's a game I never got to play.
Same.
So, and I think in October they're re-releasing Star Ocean 2, which is a game that I really enjoyed. And then like, you've got like services and stuff like that too. Like I know like there's PlayStation Premium. I think there's like Xbox Live Arcade. I don't know if that's still the thing. It might be something else. And then like Nintendo has Nintendo Online, which has like a couple of old consoles, but they're only like slowly trickling stuff in.
Yeah.
And then
you just reminded me that I used to I used to love the arcade games on Xbox.
Yeah.
Like on my 360, I used to look for new games to download off the arcade. And there's games like I'm thinking back now, and it's like, could I even play these games anymore?
It's funny you mentioned that because there's a game I have on Steam that I played on Xbox. I never owned an Xbox, but I played on a friend's Xbox. And I have it, and I had to get a fan patch to make it work in Steam. Is with Geometry Wars, like original Geometry Wars.
I remember that one.
Used to play the hell out of that game, and then one day I tried to boot it up, and Steam was like, "Oh no, you can't run this anymore." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, what?" Yeah, like, you know, if they could only just do more with it, like. Yeah. But like, how hard is it to take an NES cartridge and port it over to something to where you can have like a stored digital copy of it?
Yeah.
So
I just discovered a core memory
oh.
5 seconds ago as we were talking about Xbox Live Arcade games. There is a game called Snoopy Flying Ace.
Okay.
It came out in 2010 for the Xbox 360. It was a multiplayer deathmatch style Snoopy, like from Peanuts, like Charlie Brown. Dogfighting game.
Oh shit!
You flew planes. There were different. You could customize planes. There were different types of planes, different weight classes. They had fast planes. They had medium planes. They had big planes, and you had 2 different weapons that you could outload. And it was a dogfighting game. You could play deathmatch. You could play capture the flag. Me and my friend Bob used to play this game so much that we were actually on top of the leaderboards. I think we were both top 5 at one point for capture the flag specifically.
Wow.
Incredible game. Actually just an incredible game. And I cannot believe that it just took me until right now to remember that this game existed. Like, how would I ever play this game again? Has anybody thought to make an emulator on the internet for Snoopy Flying Ace?
I mean, who knows?
I'm gonna look.
There's got to be like a Reddit subreddit somewhere that's just like Snoopy is like Red Baron, kind of like,
yeah. But even then it's like there's no, what multiplayer servers are there going to be for this? Like I'm never going to have the ability to actually have the experience of playing Snoopy Flying Ace online with random people that I match made into, like, ever again.
Yeah. I mean, that was the case for the longest time with the Scott Pilgrim beat 'em up game. It got delisted, and the only way you could play it was if you already had it downloaded. And then last year they finally like settled the rights between Universal and the people that produced the game, and they re-released the Scott Pilgrim game. And like, I snapped it up immediately. Was just like, I'm buying this and putting it on my Switch in case this situation ever happens again. There was a similar situation with GoldenEye. Like, that was a huge release this year. They re-released GoldenEye, but like, it was in such like limbo because there were like so many different hands in like the licensing pot for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, a game that I remember playing so much on my N64, like having parties at my house with all of my friends standing around playing 4-player split screen GoldenEye. It took them so long to remake that game.
Yeah.
Like, and there's just like, there's so many other things out there. That's why I was really impressed with, like, I think this is like the 3rd week in a row we've probably brought this game up, but like, I am thoroughly impressed with how well Street Fighter 6 has like old games built into it.
It's very cool.
Like, the idea that I can just go and sit down in a cabinet and not even play actual Street Fighter 6, I can go play Street Fighter 2 in Street Fighter 6.
I wish that, like, there was just a library somewhere that I could actually, like, in the game, like, let me play what I want to play. Like, don't make me just wait for it to show up on the right week.
Yeah.
Or right day or whatever. It is cool though.
Yeah. like it seems like in the last few years, like I used to shit on Capcom a lot because they forgot Mega Man, and Mega Man's like a beloved thing for me.
Yeah.
But it seems as in like the last few years, like Capcom has started to do a better job of like re-releasing old stuff, except for Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But you know, that's neither here nor there. Like, come on, Capcom and Marvel, you want to make a shitload of money? Just re-release MVC2 with rollback netcode.
Yeah, I think Capcom is starting to realize that they have a lot of nostalgia factor.
Yeah,
in their games.
What was it last year? The Capcom collection that had all of the Darkstalkers games on it was released, and it had rollback netcode, and it just sold like gangbusters.
Yeah,
they made so much money off that. I mean, and it had it had like Red Earth and like a mech fighting game that never made it to the States. That everybody's just like, what is this? So it's one of those things like, okay, yeah, I get it. Some of you want to make money off remastering and re-releasing your games like a billion times, but you know, can you just like throw us a bone every once in a while?
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
I think something that also concerns me is online games. Games as a service. I guess games as a service is probably a more recent term.
I mean, like MMOs.
I'm thinking like MMOs. Some older MMOs have dedicated player bases that are interested in kind of like running, I guess now like fan run games. I'm thinking like Toontown. Mm-hmm. I think Wizard 101 is probably still kicking somewhere.
I think City of Heroes has moved into like fan territory.
Yeah. Star Wars Galaxies has moved into fan territory. But you know, it to me, I guess also just kind of raises that question of, you know, what happens when the game companies that are running these games and operating the servers, what happens when they decide that it's no longer profitable for them to do so? Or B, what happens when players lose interest in the game such that the core experience of the game is kind of broken by the fact that there's no longer a community, no longer at least enough of a community that the game functions as intended.
Right.
You know, if I were to log into World of Warcraft tomorrow and there was nobody online, you know, like that's an absurd example, but just say, for instance, something just intrinsic would be lost about the game, right? Which is, you know, my comments about Snoopy flying Ace, right? Like, maybe I could find a downloadable version of the game somewhere, but if there's nobody to play it with, it's like, well, you know, I might as well not have the game.
Right. I bet it wouldn't even have like bot support.
Right. Yeah, it might. I don't know, but even then, you know.
Yeah. It's all just like really weird to think about, like when stuff like that, like I played World of Warcraft when it first came out, and then like I have a lot of great memories of that. And then when Classic came out, I got it and was like, okay, yeah, this is gonna be like that. And it just, the game was so heavily optimized. It was just like, oh, like all the like the magic and the fun's kind of gone.
Yeah.
So
I think something that's important to highlight about this discussion that we're having as far as like preservation is concerned, this is not a problem that I think is as serious in other forms of media. Like, obviously we made that comment earlier. I made that comment earlier about silent film.
Yeah.
But, you know, books, right?
Oh yeah.
Books can go out of print, but a book, you will just need the text somewhere. If somebody has made a digital archive of it and you can read it, then you almost like, you know, you can make arguments about, well, you're not holding it, you're not flipping through the pages. To me, that's a whole different ballpark than, you know, like, well, I can't fucking flip my PC around the way I would my Game Boy Advance for WarioWare Twisted. Movies, even, you know, like obviously VHS is probably hard to come by these days. I'm certain collectors somewhere have VHS tapes and VHS machines, certainly.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, you just need a DVD player. I mean, at least for the past couple of decades, if you have a DVD player, you can probably play most of the movies you can find, or even just stream it.
Yeah, it's the amount of streamability is insane with movies nowadays.
I worry less about the loss of, I guess, what I'm calling like an authentic original experience. We might be able to have a more nuanced discussion about whether the original experience's authenticity is something that we should even desire. I think for a historical, you know, scholarly kind of research perspective, it is something that I desire. But, you know, movies, it's like, you know, I don't know, you just watch the movie.
Right.
Sure, you're not in a theater, you know, Christopher Nolan, if he's going to get mad about not watching something in IMAX or whatever, but it's an odd dilemma that I think is particularly serious for video games. And so I think there's perhaps not really an existing precedent for how to handle this kind of thing.
Right.
Which is concerning.
Yeah. It kind of loops back around to the video games as art kind of thing. Like, if you play a remake of a game, are you still getting the developer and the director's like original intentions with some of the stuff in the game?
Yeah.
So, and preservation, and even if like with the preservation point, like it's so ridiculous now, like how accessible stuff is. I think we had a meme about it at some point in our Discord server talking about like Dark Souls, where it's like, think about like DS1 with people playing it and they didn't know anything, and then the internet comes along and you can play the game and find every single little secret.
Right.
So, like, I would have never known that you need to curl up into a ball and have a crow carry you back to the starting area to find a piece of paper to let me fall through a painting. Right. If it hadn't have been for Extra Life.
Extra Life. I didn't even know until like 2 years ago that you could join the Gravelord Covenant.
So
and now that's like one of my favorite ways to play the game is like rushing the Gravelord Greatsword before literally anything else.
So like to think about the original experience of DS1 when it first came out, where it was just like, you know, where Miyazaki's intention was for people to spread this information via word of mouth. Yeah. Like
in the same way that people in arcades might, you know, spread like, you know, fatalities for Mortal Kombat, you know.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm glad you mentioned Dark Souls actually, because I was lucky enough to have played Dark Souls 1 on PC back in the day. And I got the Prepare to Die edition.
Yeah.
Which now is coveted on Steam, despite the fact that it is broken. There's apparently some differences between the remaster on Steam and the Prepare to Die edition that has people in many cases preferring the Prepare to Die edition. I'm not sure exactly what the differences are, but I know that I think if you go on I don't know, like G2A.
Yeah.
Let me just double check, because I think you can still get the Prepare to Die edition on G2A through a third-party seller, but people are selling it for like
stupid high.
Hundreds. Yeah, stupid high. Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition, Steam Key Global, $327.
Holy crap.
Right, like, why? I just don't understand. Like, is the remaster that bad? You guys are going to have to look into it for me. I don't know.
Just sell your Steam account, man.
Yeah, good. But if I go to my library and I go to the store page for Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition, it actually just tells me that it's not available anymore.
Right.
It says Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition is no longer available on the Steam store. Notice online services are no longer available for this product. So I can't even PvP. So if I want to play Dark Souls PvP, I have to buy the remaster.
Right.
Which, you know, thankfully I don't really have any interest in doing that right now, but like, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all kind of crazy. So, but all right, I think we'll wrap this up. You got any final closing thoughts on game preservation that you want to impart to the listeners, Michael?
I think if there's one thing that I would have told my younger self, and so maybe take this with you moving forward for those of you who are gaming enthusiasts and who actually like buying physical things to hold on to, don't throw anything out.
Yeah. I sold so many of my old Super Nintendo games at one point, and now I'm like, God damn it, why did I do that?
Yeah. I'm sure I probably at some point traded a lot of my stuff into GameStop thinking that I wanted to save up for a new game or something like that. And now it's I'm looking at this ridiculous nonsense, people selling WarioWare Twisted for $300. And I'm just thinking to myself, wow,
Mm-hmm.
It's entirely possible that I sold it to GameStop. It's also entirely possible that it ended up in a box somewhere between moves, or it ended up in the trash can somehow. In the moment, you just don't even think about the possibility that these things could be valuable later on, or that you may lose the ability to experience a childhood favorite as you once did.
Yeah.
So, just don't throw things out. Put them in a box somewhere. Hold on to it. Remember where it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to find my Donkey Konga bongos. They are somewhere in my house.
I'm going to get a picture at 2 a.m. tonight from you. It's going to be, found them.
I'll let you guys know next episode. I'm going to let you know if I found it.
Well,
hopefully I do.
Well, speaking of next episode will be our 5th episode, and we're going to pop champagne bottles and fire off stuff because we made it to 5 episodes, which was our goal.
Yes.
And we will be discussing the first video game crash.
Very exciting topic.
Yeah, it's going to be a good episode, I think. We've got a lot of homework to do between now and then. But we actually have kind of a roadmap for the rest of the year. I figured I'd go over it real quick with everybody before we sign off. But we have episode 5, which will be the first crash. And you're like, but you said that's where you wanted to get to. Well, yeah, once we get to 5, we got to get to 10. After that will be our October episode, which I think is going to be kind of fun. We had been tossing it up, and then this YouTube video fell in our laps, and then I went and played this thing. We're going to be talking about a really interesting Doom mod and maybe tie that into some other fun stuff. We haven't quite figured it out. We're still working on it. Our November episode will be kind of an interesting sidestep backwards before we leave the 1970s, and then we'll end the year with the obligatory Game Awards.
Yes, very excited for that.
Yeah, the instruction booklets, Game Awards, and they're not going to be what you think they are.
Yes.
I mean, we might have some, but and then after that,
we might have some more traditional categories, but we're also going to have some nice freestyle categories.
Yeah, it's going to be our end of the year. Just kind of have fun, shoot the shit for however long we feel about, and make up some really great topics.
Yeah.
But we appreciate everybody listening and tuning in to us rambling on about game preservation, and it's very important. I will definitely include some links with this episode. I think that's that'll be good for people who are curious about being more invested in this. So,
yeah.
But other than that, I guess we'll do our plugs and then wrap this up. So, Michael, where can the folks find you?
I guess I'm still on Twitter. Are people still on Twitter? It's X now.
Yeah, it's X now.
I'm on X, and I'm also on Threads.
Is X going to give it to you?
X going to give it. Yeah, I think my Twitter is still what it was last month.
Yeah.
So I certainly haven't changed it. At Mackerel Prawns, so sounding like a fish.
Okay.
And then Instagram, same deal, except there's an underscore between the two.
Okay. Well, and you can find me on Instagram and Facebook on my art stuff, which is Press Art F4, all one word. I'm also on the Cajun Greatness podcast. We've been on kind of a hiatus right now. We got some folks moving, and so we're in the midst of some stuff. We might try and get some Cajun instruction booklet goodness at some point. We'll see. I'm also on Twitch, on twitch.tv/backwardshero, but I don't really do a whole lot. And as for the show, you can reach out to us at the Instruction Booklet on Facebook. We're also instruction_BK on the X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it. We're also on Linktree. You can find all of the stuff we mentioned, which is it's like linktr.ee/instruction booklet. And then we have to thank the parent channel, the AYCH folks. They have their extra, AYCH extra on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. That's where you listen to us. So they're also on Twitter on at AYCH Podcast and AYCH Extra, and then Instagram. Thanks everybody for listening to us, and for make sure you preserve your games. Don't throw things away.
Thanks everyone.
Find your Donkey Konga stuff and
find your Donkey Kong bongos.
Yeah. So have a good night.
And have a good night.